Welcome back. What's happening with plans for Electric Boat to build a second submarine in 2025? The U.S. Navy only requested one in the 2025 defense budget when they normally order two each year. Second District Congressman Joe Courtney joins me in Studio A to explain what's going on. I'm sure everyone says the same thing. You're two sub Joe. There's one sub in the budget. So Congressman Courtney, what's the plan?
So the plan is to do what the House Armed Services Committee did about 3 weeks ago, which is to report out the 2025 National Defense Bill, which included putting that sub back in the procurement. Again, just to be clear, there's a lot of subs being built right now in the yard. I mean, there's one that we just commissioned, another one that we just commissioned, and later this year, Iowa is going to be commissioned. Next year, Idaho. And there's probably about 13 or 14 in the conga line, sort of waiting in various stages. But again, the budget is about procurement, about new contracts. And again, we have done two per year since 2011, 13 straight years. That's how we're rebuilding the industrial base, because people are now feeling like, okay, this is for real. When you start cutting, it sends a really bad signal. And that's what we're really trying to avoid. One last point, 5,300 hires last year. About 40% in Rhode Island, 60% in Connecticut. Right now, I just checked the numbers yesterday. They've hired 1,800 already in this calendar year, and the goal is to be close to 5,000 by the end of December. So, the hiring is still very strong. Again, with all the work that's already on the books, but. In terms of the industrial base, you've got to keep that procurement signal steady.
Well, let's talk about that, because the Navy, they don't dispute that submarines are going to be needed, right? They haven't taken down their total force structure looking forward. They just want this 2025 number. And one of the things they said was that there's been delays in finishing some other subs. But it seems to me it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg, because if the supply chain can't keep up with demand, but then you cut the demand, the supply chain won't ever get there. Is that what you're fighting?
I mean, you stated it perfectly, and that's the argument that we've been making. That's the argument which the submarine industrial base has been making, is that you don't get production back to full two per year when you cut procurement to one. It just sends the wrong signal. These are small machine shops that are being asked to invest serious money into new machine tools, and there's one out in eastern Connecticut that's was going to do a $4 million facility expansion. And it just creates all that uncertainty that's there. As far as the need, again, I just returned from Singapore, where they had the annual Shangri-La conference, 21 straight years, all the countries out in that part of the year. The U.S. Navy was heavily represented, along with Secretary Austin. And there was it was all about subs. I mean, AUKUS obviously was a big topic of conversation. Korea had reporters there saying, do you think we can buy a nuclear submarine sometime soon? Because everybody realizes that that's the one tool, that's the one platform that really China can't sort of figure out. They've expanded their Navy, their missile force. Surface ships are much more vulnerable than they used to be, and our subforce and our submarine technology is still the envy of the world.
I want to make sure we have time for other topics, but tell me, what should people be watching for? If they're in southeastern Connecticut, maybe they work at one of those machine shops, maybe a spouse or a relative works at the boat. What do you want them to watch for? When will this be decided? You're going to keep fighting, I know, but what do we watch for?
So, I mean, really, this is not going to come to a decision point till much later in the calendar year, probably after the election, when, the two sides, because the Senate hasn't even begun their markup process, both in terms of Armed Services Committee or the Appropriations Committee, and there's going to be the four corners getting together. In the meantime, again, I think we're going to continue to make our case that we can meet this demand, and that the best way to expand the force is to keep the procurement steady.
And one of the issues is there's only so much money to go around, so it's just going to be about hashing out where that money goes, just quickly.
Right. There was this cap from the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1% growth in the Department of Defense. I think really there's one of the worst kept secrets in town is that people think that cap is going to be lifted before we get to endgame.
And that might give you some flexibility to get it done.
Yes, all right. and for other priorities too.
All right. Let's talk about some other things. You mentioned being at that conference, and one of the things you did at that conference was meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What was his message to you and your colleagues from Congress?
So, again, flew in the dark of the night, met with the five of us that were on that trip that was there. Again, it was a number of messages. Number one, thank you for supporting the supplemental. Kind of gave us an update where things stand. They need more latitude in terms of trying to take out some of the air bases that are flying in the bombers into Ukraine. I mean, the good news is the rate of bombardment has been cut in half since the supplemental, because now they actually have more, artillery shells and defense battery shells, et cetera. Secondly, he really was there on a mission to the Chinese delegation. Again, China had sent a delegation to this conference as well. That you can't keep propping up Putin in this war effort and then expect Europe to sort of welcome China with open arms. And Xi Jinping was in Europe really just about a month ago on a kind of a charm offensive to try and get more economic and market space. And he was really trying to bolster, because there were European countries at this as well, France and UK, et cetera, that message has to be really strong to China, is that if you want to be welcome, both in terms of the trading world as well as, just the civilized world, then, you've got to cut this guy off.
Did President Zelensky say if the aid was too little, too late? Because last time you and I talked, that was the worry.
Yeah, I mean, he understood how hard this was, and so, I mean, his message was really more positive. I mean, we did actually, and I asked him about their success in the Black Sea. They've sunk a third of the Russian Navy and pushed them back to the eastern part of the sea so that the grain shipments have resumed. An amazing achievement. They have no Navy.
Yeah,
they did this all with drones and, basically unmanned. Yeah, so he's like, yeah, we don't talk about that enough. I'm like, well, I want to help you, because no, it's an extraordinary success.
Just real quickly, I know you've done a lot of work with the Coast Guard, and you said Admiral Fagan was with you on that trip. The Coast Guard sex abuse scandal has kind of been continuing, and there's a bill you just worked on related to that. Tell us about it quickly.
Safe to report if a victim has been treated, harassed, assaulted. Reporting that is not going to damage that person's career because they may have been past curfew or had a beer or whatever. The other academies have already embrace that, and Admiral Fagan, already has put that into effect by regulation. My bill would codify it, just like the other service branches. She's also doing more in terms of tracking, better tracking systems for sort of bad actors, because they get moved around a lot, and just in terms of reassignments. And she's going to be testifying before the Senate this coming week. But I think she's really making a very strong effort, and was a great representative for the U.S. at the conference there, because as you and I were talking, they are in such high demand with the Pacific Island nations, the Philippines, Japan, you name it. They want those white holes out there, and sometimes even more than the U.S. Navy.
And all over the world right now serving the Coast Guard. So that's an important bill. We covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, but we'll be checking in with you for sure on the submarine effort, because it affects a lot of people here. Joe Courtney, thank you for being with us.
Great. Thanks, Eric.